Hi, fourth grade. We are continuing with There's an Owl in the Shower. We are on chapter 3, and the title of chapter 3 is Problems. Okay, here we go. The end of chapter 2, we just finished off with Borden attempting to shoot this owl whose name we learned is Enrique, and he hesitated for one moment. Enrique flew away, and he was not able to kill the owl. So that's how chapter 2 ended. So here we go with chapter 3. Problems. Borden did not return to the owl nest as soon as he thought he would. Jimmy Olden, his best friend, got him a job after school at Mike's gas station. Mike's had become the town's west side meeting place after the government ban. Here, owl lovers ran into owl haters. They argued, shouted, and shook fists at one another. Both sides were convinced they were right. Borden listened, but he was perfectly clear about where he stood. He polished bumper stickers that said, "I like spotted owls fried." He left the dirt on the ones that read, "Saved the spotted owl." One day, his father, Leon Watson, pulled up at the gas station. He stepped out of his truck as Paul James, the leader of the owl lovers, stepped out of his car. "Good morning, Mr. Watson," Paul James said. "Humph," Leon growled. "When are you going to care more about people than owls?" Paul James had heard this so many times, he was tired of it. "The trouble is, you loggers don't see the problem," he said, his voice edgy. "The decline of the spotted owl is like a canary in a coal mine. We are being warned that the environment is not safe." "My environment is sure not safe," Leon snapped back. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and the muscles in his arms looked as if they were about to go into action. Paul James, a science teacher at the high school, as well as an environmentalist, turned his attention to filling up his gas tank. "The spotties," he said, "are telling us we have not properly managed our forests." "You're crazy," Leon snapped, coming toward him. "The owls aren't telling us anything. For years, the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management have been telling us to cut the old growth. They ought to know what's good for us." Here's a picture of Leon and Paul James having an interaction at the gas station. And you can see it looks like things are getting a little bit tense. Okay. "Well, they don't seem to," said Paul James. He turned and faced Leon. "They were warned years ago that the spotty was in trouble. Environmentalists told them they should change their policy. They didn't. The spotties kept declining until they are now a threatened species. When the environment, the water, fish, and soil began to deteriorate, then the law kicked in. You guys are suffering for other people's mistakes." "Owls be damned," Leon snapped. He turned off the pump and headed for the office to pay. "My kids are hungry," he said as he passed Paul James. "In my book, kids come first." He reached out and tapped the teacher on the chest. Taken by surprise, Paul James swung out his arm and caught Leon across the chin. Leon grabbed Paul's arm and wrestled him to the ground. Borden, knowing how strong his father was, ran to the telephone and dialed 911. At that moment, 2 more loggers arrived in a pickup truck. "Knock him out!" one of them shouted. Paul James wrestled free of Leon's grip and got to his feet. He stepped back. Leon strode to within inches of him. His bronze-colored hair was wet with perspiration. His brown eyes glittered under shaggy brows. Borden saw his fists clench. "Pop, don't!" Borden yelled and stepped between them. One of the newcomers grabbed Borden by the back of his shirt and yanked him away. A stranger walking by thought he saw the big logger picking on a boy, pushed him back, and told him to lay off. The man turned and socked the stranger. A student who was filling his tank saw Leon drive a powerful blow into Paul James's stomach. The student jumped on Leon and held his arms. Leon laughed, expanded his chest, and bent forward. The student was catapulted through the air. He landed on the grass with a thud just as the police drove up. Borden ran to help him. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. Leon took another poke at Paul James. Paul James returned it. An officer grabbed him. The other took Leon by the arm and pulled him back. The fighting stopped. "Hey, I'm sorry," Paul James said to Leon. Borden looked at his father. He hoped his dad would apologize. He did not. He shook his fist at Paul James. "Careful, Leon," Captain Ryan said. "I don't want to have to arrest you for disorderly conduct." "I'm not disorderly," Leon said. "Society is." On his way to the office to pay for his gas, Leon gave Borden a friendly poke in the ribs. "Arrest that man," the stranger shouted and pointed to Leon. "If you don't, I will. I'll make a citizen's arrest." The 2 officers looked at each other helplessly. Fights and short tempers were common in Fresta since the ban, but no crimes had been committed. This spat was over. Both men were calm. The policemen did not want to arrest Leon, Watson, or Paul James. The stranger sensed this. "I'm coming with you to the precinct, and I'm going to see that you arrest them. If you don't, I will. We cannot put up with fights and brawls every day." All right, said Sergeant Ryan. "I'll do it. I'll deliver a warrant for his arrest tonight. He's not going anywhere." "What about him?" said one of the loggers, pointing to Paul James. "He started it." "Him too," said Captain Ryan. He got into his patrol car and slammed the door. The policeman drove off. The stranger followed. "Tough times," Mike said when Leon paid for his gas. He shook his head. "It's really terrible to not have a job." Leon nodded and strode to his truck. He slammed the door. Paul James had paid for his gas and had driven off. Leon followed. Borden watched his pop turn right on Main Street and head toward home. He was upset. His father was going to be arrested. It was not fair. He thought of the owl on the mountain and knew it was time to carry out his plan. Okay, 4th graders who are tuning in live, that was the end of chapter 3. Go ahead and see if we can kind of manage this. Let's just have a couple people maybe unmute and tell us, what did you think of chapter 3? Connor, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute.
I thought chapter 3 was kind of, there was a big fight, so it just felt, I think it's starting to get closer to the climax. Because fighting, and it kind of ended on a cliffhanger, because it said it was time for him to carry out his plan, and we don't know his plan yet, so.
Yeah. What do you think his plan might be, Connor? What is the plan that Borden has kind of shared with us already?
He was gonna... I don't know.
What's he gonna do to the owls? What's he been trying to do to the owls?
What was he? Well, yeah, I know he was gonna kill them.
Yeah.
But wasn't he gonna try to do that all along?
Yeah, I wonder if that's his plan, or maybe you're right. Maybe Connor, he has a new plan as well. I don't know. But he thought of the owl on the mountain and knew it was time to carry out his plan. It sounds like now he's really feeling angry about the fact that his dad doesn't have a job, and he's upset that his dad's going to be arrested for getting in a fight. Colby, what did you think? What was the energy of chapter 3?
I thought it was really, definitely going up to the climax. I mean...
Yeah, I agree with you and Connor. There was a lot of rising action happening. I think we can feel that energy building, and you're right. To me, that chapter felt kind of uncomfortable. It was kind of like, said, like, it made me nervous that they were getting in this fist fight in public and people were getting hurt. It was kind of violent. Chapter 3 was kind of a rough chapter. It doesn't sound like anyone was seriously hurt, but fighting and the police coming, like, all of that sounds pretty bad. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's check in and see what happens in chapter 4. Go ahead and unmute. Or, sorry, not unmute. Go ahead and mute if you're not muted. And we will continue. There we go. I think everybody's muted. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys, for not using the chat for anything. I'm going to turn all the volume off again, so I won't be able to hear you guys at all. Okay. Volume's off. And chapter 4. Here we go. Chapter 4. The Owlets. 2 weeks had passed since Enrique had been hunted by Borden. They had been stressful weeks for the owl and his family. Food was difficult to find. He could not hunt the fir forest where the barred owl lived, or the north slope of the mountain that had been clear-cut. He had to fly to more and more distant areas of his home range, and he caught less and less prey for his efforts. He hunted from sunset to dawn. The shortage of food unsettled Enrique's mate. The owlets were growing weak, yet they were not feathered well enough for her to leave them and help Enrique hunt. As each night passed, they all grew more hungry. The owlets constantly begged with open mouths, a sight and sound that aroused her instincts to feed. She shifted restlessly. One night, Enrique caught nothing. The hunger cries of the owlets drove the female to the limb beside the nest. She listened. A black-tailed deer cropped leaves below. A pine marten ran along tree limbs, but she heard no flying squirrel feet. She spread her wings and flew to a distant valley of old trees. The forest did not belong to her and Enrique, but to her own parents. She had lived there for the first 6 months of her life and knew the forest well. She alighted on a family hunting post, a broken limb above a tan oak grove. Abruptly, she flattened her feathers to her body in fear. She was not at ease on her parents' property. They had driven her off when she was mature. Territory belongs to adult pairs. The young must go. She listened, expecting them to attack her again, but heard only the wind bringing fog in from the Pacific Ocean. She flew deeper into the property. Near the top of a giant Douglas fir, she alighted and tuned into the night sounds. At first, she heard nothing. Then, in the foggy distance, she recognized the boom of her father's voice. He was calling to his mate. She waited. No mate answered him. He called insistently, over and over again. He was asking a female to come take the place of the mate he had lost. No one answered. He went on calling. A chipmunk came out of its hole in an oxalis garden. It rustled leaves on its way to a gooseberry plant. Enrique's mate heard it. She crouched to drop down on it when a splash of rain jammed her hearing. She bobbed her head up and down. She twisted from front to back, trying to catch the sound of the chipmunk again. But she could not. The rain was too noisy. But she did hear a coyote call from the grasslands near the top of the mountain and remembered the chipmunks there. Eager to leave her parents' property, she flew swiftly over the tops of the great trees to an ancient oak forest that grew higher up in the mountain than the Douglas firs. She alighted on a leafy limb. A Steller's jay, sleeping on a perch below her, rustled its feathers to flip off the rain. The owl heard and struck. Using her wings like oars, she maneuvered the bird between the limbs to the ground. Taking a firm grip with her feet, she pushed off and carried the jay back to her young. One bird was all she got that night. The next night, when Enrique and his mate had gone hunting, the hungry owlets climbed out of the deep nest using their beaks and claws. Sitting on the rim, side by side, they listened to the small music of the midnight treetops. They could hear the pine siskins and kinglets shifting their feet in their shelters in the dark. The owlets turned their heads until their ears told them exactly where the little birds were. Then rain splattered onto the fir needles, and the owlets heard only taps and splatters. When the air grew cold, they huddled together and watched for their parents. Here's a picture, real quick, of the owlets in the nest. So cute. Little baby birds. Okay. It rained for a week. This was unusual. Mid-May is the beginning of the dry season in the northwest coastal forest. Over the eons, spotted owls have adapted to this season by timing the arrival of their young with the good weather. This year, nature was failing the spotted owls on the mountain. Despite the rain, Enrique traveled each night over his home range hunting for food. He came upon the oak forest and caught a young jay that was sleeping alone. He carried it to the owlets. His mate was not there to feed them. Their cries provoked him to tear the prey into small pieces and put them into the gaping mouths. While he fed them, the young male gazed into his face. The owlet saw the disk of dark feathers, the vibrissae that stood out like a sunburst around Enrique's beak, and the dark, soulful eyes. The owlet looked and looked until the face was printed on his memory. The next day, the rain fell in torrents. It ran down tree trunks, bounced off limbs, then soaked into the deep soil of the owl grove. Beyond the owl's nest, on the treeless mountainside, it hit the ground with the force of bullets, dug up the soil, and carried it down to Fire Creek. The muddy runoff clogged the gills of the young salmon, and in the creek, hundreds of fish died. The rain stopped in late afternoon, and the mother owl went out to hunt. The owlets huddled in a spot of warm sunshine. Suddenly, a powerful wind roared off the ocean. It sped through the space where Borden's father had felled the big Douglas firs. With no trees to check its force, it hit the owl's tree with hurricane strength. The owlets were swept from the nest. The little male grabbed at tree limbs, fell, spread his stubby wings, and was blown toward the logging road. He crashed onto the forest floor. The female, who was always larger than the male, landed not far from him. Hunched and frightened, the two owlets sat on their heels, staring at the rain-spangled flowers into which they had fallen. That's the end of chapter 4. So the little baby owlets of Enrique and his mate fell out of the nest. And we're going to see what happens next. Okay, 4th grade, if you are watching the video, we will see you tomorrow for chapter 5. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you later.